Thank you. I'm Sue Ryan. I'm Dean of the Library at Stetson University, and I will tell you that we'd like to take any questions you might have at the end of the presentation. So if you have any, just scribble them down, and we will be happy to answer anything you want to know. So with me today is Tandy Grubbs, and he is the professor and chair of our Department of Chemistry here. So you're going to get a little dose of chemistry in this presentation.
Not much.
But we're using chemistry as an example of how you can integrate 3D printing into the curriculum. But as you listen, be thinking about your own curriculum and how this might be a good fit into whatever it is you do. And for public libraries, that want to get into this, think of how you might work with local schools or do some entrepreneurial workshops with this type of technology. So generally, when we go around the country, we've done this kind of presentation at a lot of library conferences and several chemistry conferences. We asked the audience, who is into 3D printing already, and our sense is that always about 50% of people have 3D printers already, and they're not quite sure what to do with them, and then the rest of the audience is usually thinking about getting into them. So my sense is that most libraries are moving in this direction or have moved in this direction and are trying to figure out exactly what the best way to maximize the use of the technology is. So we talk about 3D printing as the glorified glue gun. So what it basically is in the industry world, they call it additive manufacturing. It's just layering down bits of material. In our case, it's usually in libraries, it's some kind of plastic filament, either an ABS or a PLA filament that you see at the bottom right of the slide on spools. The technology was patented in 1986, and today a low-end desktop printer can cost you $500. I've even seen some a little bit cheaper than that, up to about $3,000. And then the higher-end commercial that you might find in a library, $20,000 up, and then of course you start getting into industrial printing and you're into six figures and higher. So this is the Gartner hype cycle. Now some of you may be familiar with Gartner. They're a company that tracks the hype of emerging technologies every year. So if you look at this slide, you can see that the red circle is where they placed 3D printing about 5 years ago, and you can see that the expectations are on the left axis. So expectations were very high for 3D printing in 2009. The bottom axis tracks from left to right technology triggers and then peak of inflated expectations, and you can see that 3D printing fell right between those two areas at that time. And then, according to Gartner, emerging technologies go through this incredible drop, this trough of disillusionment, and then come out into this slope of enlightenment, and then reach a plateau of productivity. So in 2009, Gartner had 3D printing at about 5 to 10 years out from mainstream adoption, which is probably not a bad guess. So in the latest Gartner hype cycle, 3D printing has been broken up into more targeted components. As you can see now, we've got 3 circles on the slide. So 3D scanners and enterprise 3D printing are already in the slope of enlightenment phase with 2 to 5 years to plateau. And that's the kind of printing you're hearing about on the news and in magazines and that sort of thing. So consumer 3D printing, in other words, 3D printing in your homes, is now right at the peak of inflated expectations. And we know that even last Christmas they were starting to market little blue and pink 3D printers to children, and I think it'll be even bigger this Christmas. So they are going to start coming into the home. So that's right at the peak of inflated expectations at this point. And then 3D bioprinting, which you've heard a lot about, some of printing organ parts and heart parts and that sort of thing, that is now climbing up the innovation trigger curve, and probably still 5 to 10 years before that will actually plateau. So why would you even want to get into 3D printing as a library? I'm not sure who the first library was who got excited about this, but in academia, we're really interested in educating a student who will be marketable, quite frankly. So there is a need for 3D printing expertise out there, and as you can see from this slide, there's the demand for workers with 3D printing skills increased by over 1,800% over the past 4 years. And if you look at the bottom graph, you can see that this is 4-year 3D printing hiring trends based on newspaper ads. So the demand for the skill set is increasing. We've only been able to find a couple examples of schools doing semester-long 3D printing courses, and you can see one is at an Institute of Technology and one is in Singapore. We are very excited that we are going to be teaching here at Stetson a semester-long course in the spring. And it's going to be taught by Tandy, who is helping me with this presentation, who is a chemist. And he will be teaming up with a political scientist. And they will teach this course out of the business school as part of an entrepreneurship designation. So truly a very interdisciplinary effort. And it's going to be very interesting to see how it comes out. Already, you know, we're not anywhere near spring semester, but the class already is full and has a waiting list. So we're really excited. The best part about it is that the library will be fully involved. The class will be taught in the library, and they will be using the printers that we have supplied for the campus. So if you Google 3D printing in libraries, you'll get countless hits, and many of you may have already seen in your own libraries MakerSpaces, innovation labs, 3D printing studios. All these are sprouting up very quickly. So libraries, both public and academic, have been very quick to embrace the maker culture, the MakerSpace culture. But what our research uncovered about 3D printing, however, was that most academic libraries were opening up their 3D printing to students and faculty to play or, you know, have fun with this technology. And we couldn't find many examples of 3D printing innovations directly tied to curriculum. So if you went and you Googled curricular applications of 3D printing in universities or colleges, you'll get lots and lots of hits from the dot-coms who make 3D printers. That's not to say that universities and colleges haven't done anything academic with the printers. Specialty academic libraries such as engineering libraries, design libraries were early adopters. But they often adopted the technologies independent of libraries or librarians. So our goal in adopting 3D printing in a primarily undergraduate academic library was to ensure that opportunities for direct curricular collaborations between the library and the teaching faculty existed. We realized that 3D printing is a lot of fun, and it's fun to print out stuff. But we told our librarians when we first got the printers to come up with academic uses for 3D printing. So soon after we bought our first 3D printer, this is what we found on Facebook. So this is our head of public services, and despite his fascination with figurines and the fascination of many of our students with printing out their Star Wars characters and their iPhone cases, we still move forward wholeheartedly with our plans to use the technology to enhance curriculum. So how do you get started with this? You know, our question was, how do you enhance curricula and promote student learning with 3D printing? And that's what the modern library is supposed to be all about, is how do you promote learning? So our first thing is just build it. They will come. Dive in and buy some equipment. I can almost guarantee you will instantly have the interest. So in our case, this is how we started out. This is our small little innovation lab. It was only about 250 square feet 2 years ago when we started. We've expanded now to 1,000 square feet, and we've got plans to triple that down the road. But what we have now are 2 Stratasys U-print printers, and you can see the big Stratasys on the far right end there. A Stratasys Wave Wash, which is not pictured, but that actually is what you put a Stratasys print job into, dissolve support filament. We've got 4 MakerBots, an Ultimaker 2 extended, a MakerGear M2, and a couple MakerBot scanners. So we've discovered that you get what you pay for. So we have a mix of computers, and if you look at the difference between the left and the right, I mean, it may not look like there's a huge difference between the lower end printers that cost $1,800 to $2,500, and these higher-end 2 Stratasys that we have that cost us about $25,000 each. They both generally do 1 color, although we do have one MakerBot which will do 2 colors. They have the same resolution, but the quality of the printing in the 2 categories of, I call the one on the left hobbyist and the one on the right a commercial grade printer, it is just vast. And once we started really collaborating with chemistry and biology and computer science and some of these other departments, we realized that we needed a more high-end printer to do more precise print jobs. And you'll see some examples of that when we start talking about the chemistry. So that's the easy part, building it, they will come. The harder part is how do you develop the collaborations? So we understand that it's often challenging to develop collaborations with teaching faculty, or if you're in a public library, maybe with some of the local schools or the businesses. And you have to think about what the challenges are going to be to do this. Certainly, management of any technology can be tough. You have to think about costs. Absolutely, you would need to budget for this. We always get asked, how much does this cost us? We're very lucky that we have an innovation endowment that supports this printing, and we fully subsidize all our printing for our students and faculty. We do recognize, however, that not every library can do that. So you're going to have to think carefully about what is your budget and how much money you want to put into this. Now, if you're a librarian and you work in a library, you know that you're always going to have hardware and software issues with any new technology that you want to use, especially in a collaborative environment. And there is a time commitment to this. This is not like putting out a printer or a database. The learning curve is higher and there's more mediation involved. So staffing is a huge issue. How are you going to staff this area, that sort of thing? What kind of level of mediation is required between the staff and the user of the printer? So we still think, despite the challenges, that both libraries and academic departments will benefit from the particular collaboration. So how do you get the buy-in? Well, you have to convince both the librarians and the teaching faculty members that something is in this good for them. In other words, we all are human beings. We think, what's in it for me if I'm going to do this? So what are the opportunities for librarians? Certainly support of institutional mission and support of library mission. I would think that most of you have mission statements that include something about your patrons or your students learning, and certainly we found that this is a tremendous learning opportunity. But if you find that 3D printing doesn't at all fit in with your institutional library mission, you probably shouldn't do it. So the next thing is, one of the things you can sell this to your administrations is the library relevancy and visibility. I cannot stress to you enough, I have worked in libraries for 3 decades, and I have never seen anything that has gotten more attention than our work with 3D printing, and it really has struck a chord with everyone from our board of trustees to our president to our provost to our faculty to our students. Everybody's excited about this, everybody wants to see it, and everybody talks about the library a lot, and that is in large part due to 3D printing. Even with all the other good things we do, this is a technology that gets attention. So it's a great marketing promotion tool for libraries. We have taken full advantage of it and taken our story on the road because it has been such a positive thing for us in that sense. And I have found that it is an incredible fundraising magnet. And as a library dean, one of my roles is to raise money for the library, and this is an easy sell. Many of your donors are going to be business people. They understand technology. They understand that students need to have skill sets for technology. And it's been an easy sell. So I have those two $25,000 printers, and both of those were funded by donors, one donor each, and it was relatively easy to convince them to support us in that way. So if you are an academic librarian, you may have to do publications and presentations as part of your role, and we certainly do here at Stetson. And in the past 2 years, we'll talk a little bit down the road of this presentation what this has done for us, but it is an amazing opportunity to present and publish. So that's what's in it for librarians. You know, what's in it for faculty? Faculty members also need reasons to collaborate with the library. So before we bought our first 3D printer, we approached the chemistry department as our potential first collaborator. And we talked to them about curricular innovation and how this could, you know, be something new and different in teaching of chemistry. And faculty members are always looking for ways to do experiential learning. That's just a fact of today's higher education environment. Student research is a big part of what we do, and students get very excited about doing research with 3D printing. And then interdisciplinary collaboration. And faculty members have pressure to do more interdisciplinary work these days, and this is a way that they can participate in something like that. And then, of course, cost sharing is a huge one, because if the library is housing the technology and the library is paying for the technology, it's a much easier sell to say, hey, I've got this thing that your students can do, but I need you to help me integrate it into your curriculum, but we're bearing the brunt of the cost. And then again, just like for librarians, publications and presentation opportunities for faculty, where the chemists have done a number of presentations and publications based on their work and their students' work with 3D printing. So when the faculty in both the library and the chemistry department were first trying to get into this a couple years ago, we both were asking the same basic question: how might educators take advantage of 3D printing to enhance curricula and promote student learning of important principles? So I'm going to turn this over for a few minutes to Tandy Grubbs, our chemistry department chair, and he's going to talk to you about what his department did with 3D printing and how they got their what's in it for me out of their collaboration with the library.
Okay, good morning. I'm Tandy Grubbs, and even though the examples I'm going to show you are in the field of chemistry, hopefully you can draw connections to other fields. Just show you some examples. I don't know how much chemistry our viewers have had, but hopefully, whether you've had some serious chemistry courses or not, you can appreciate the fact that it's a field where visualization and understanding the three-dimensional shapes of things is incredibly important. We need our students to understand how molecules are shaped and how they fit together, because that is what chemistry is all about. It's about reactant molecules coming together and either interacting, undergoing reactions, or not. Now, as a chemistry educator, we have several tools available for our students and that we use in the classroom for creating molecules and visualizing what they look like in 3 dimensions. They're usually software tools that in the past we've just used on a computer. And some of these tools, they actually make use of quantum mechanics theory to mathematically calculate what molecules look like, and then there'll be some sort of graphical interface where students can actually look at these things on the screen. Well, with the rise of 3D printing, we realized we had a real possibility here of taking that a step further and you know, actually creating physical models that students could create and handle, turn around, look at, and so that was the challenge for us, and the collaboration with the library made this possible for us, because it was going to involve some equipment, some mediation equipment that we just frankly couldn't afford to do or really had the time to do. Now, to do this, the slide here is called Crossing the Divide, that we have these software resources in chemistry that we use and which stores molecules in certain file formats. Over here, something PDB and MOL2. The 3D printing world kind of has their own language and various file formats, and this all sort of lies in the realm of computer science. And so how do we as chemists cross this divide and take our chemical structures and get them into three-dimensional form? And I have to assure you, I'm not a computer scientist, but I did have to familiarize myself a little bit with some of this. There's a lot of different 3D graphical file formats, and they're listed here in the table. I'm certainly not going to go through these, but if you become familiar with 3D printing, you learn that there's one file format that has emerged that kind of seems to be the standard in which most commercial 3D printers understand, and something called an STL file, Standard Tessellation Language. And what it does is it defines your object in terms of a bunch of triangles. It gives the vertices of a bunch of triangles that define the surface. And so here's a molecule, and you can actually see the little triangles. And so we wanted to be able to take our chemical structures and convert them into this STL language if we want to be able to 3D print them. And so I've been working with Sue in the library for a few years, and we've made great progress. And in fact, we've been able to publish some of this work. I did a book chapter recently for an American Chemical Society symposium, and this very busy figure over here to the left is a figure from that publication. But what it's showing us here is that these are at the top some software and web resources that chemists have available to them. And this is a flow diagram that sort of shows us how do we take these and get to the bottom here to actually 3D print the object. And you may note there's one box up here at the top that has a direct arrow that gets you to the bottom, and this is something called the NIH 3D Print Exchange. It just recently started by the National Institute of Health. It's basically a web community collection of biomolecules, and so that is a resource that our students can take advantage of. They can log into that website, download the structure of hemoglobin, something like that, and in a STL file and directly 3D print it. For the vast majority of the other types of resources that we use, there is no direct connection to our printer, and so what we were able to learn is that there's a lot of other software resources out there available, and as true academics like to do, we want to find a way to do this for free. So a lot of these are freely downloadable things. Something called the Python molecular viewer is very useful. There's some software tools for editing these files before you print them if you want to make some changes to them. And anybody out there who's used 3D printing may already be aware of some other web resources for creating objects. Tinkercad, Thingiverse is a collection of 3D printable objects, and there's even some scanning methods. So this diagram, if you have any chemists, associates, feel free to share it with them. What I want to do now is just very quickly go through a couple specific examples of what exactly we've done with our students. And so among the various molecules that are recognizable to the general public, here's one that's emerged in recent years, something called Buckminster fullerene, or to shorten that, we call it the buckyball. And it's composed entirely of carbon, 60 carbon atoms, and in the shape of a soccer ball. And so early on we challenged our students, create this molecule and generate a 3D printed form for it. And so if you go back to that flow diagram, one of the resources that chemists often use is something called Gaussian, and this is one of those softwares that allows us to predict what the shape of a molecule would be using full-blown quantum mechanics. And so the student was able to use Gaussian to create this. This is the computer rendering of it. This Python molecular viewer is another software resource that we use to convert it into an STL file. This is what it looks like when it's printed on the high-end Stratasys printer, you can actually see there's the molecule. It looks like it's got something kind of around it. There's a support material made out of a different kind of plastic that when you put it in a bath dissolves away. And so the sequence of events here from the computer, printed, put it in the bath, and then there you can actually see the molecule. There's also some other little tricks that if you expose that plastic to acetone vapor, so it's basically the same chemical that's in fingernail polish remover, you can make the dull finish glossy. So we call that the acetone gloss treatment. So there's one example of how we're creating an actual physical model. Here's another one, and if I teach general chemistry every year, and one of the topics that I always want students to understand well are crystal lattices. What exactly are crystal lattices? And we actually have them try to understand the difference of what are called cubic crystals, and that there's actually subclasses of these, something called simple cubic, body-centered cubic, face-centered cubic. What exactly is the difference between those? And it's very hard to visualize just looking at a picture in a textbook or even on a computer screen. And so here's two. This structure right here is called a face-centered cubic. You can see the cubic shape, and the reason why it's called face-centered is because there's an atom in the middle of every face. And this is sort of the simplest three-dimensional repeating pattern of that crystal structure. This one over here is called body-centered cubic, and because it has an atom right at the center of the cube, in the body of the cube. And so students create these things. We can take these models, pass them around the classroom, and they really get a better idea of what's the difference between those different structures. I'm going to skip over this one. This is just a molecule we created that was actually on the cover of Chemical and Engineering News recently, that's related to similar to the structure of DNA, except for it's made out of lithium and phosphorus atoms. Here's one of my favorite examples, and so when you take organic chemistry, students learn that there are certain types of molecules that we call isomers, and they have exactly the same chemical formula, but there's something different about them. And among the different types of isomers, there are something which are called optical isomers. And to kind of give you an analogy of what these are, so here's some artwork from Through the Looking Glass, and so supposedly the story, Alice is up here on the dresser top, and she looks in the mirror, and she's wondering whether the world she sees reflected in the mirror is different from the one that she lives in. And what you learn as a chemist is that, yes, it is. That reflected world actually can be very different chemically. So down here at the bottom, this is an example of two compounds that are isomers of each other. And in fact, the only way they differ from one another is one is the mirror image of the other. And so if you imagine putting a mirror in between these, this is what the other one would see. And you may say, well, how can those be different? If you take this one and rotate it around and try to superimpose it on the other one, you'll learn that you can't do that. You always will have an atom or group pointing in the wrong direction. So what is the significance of having these isomers? One of the most well-known examples, and this is related to, come back here, a drug that was administered back in the 50s and 60s for nausea to pregnant patients called thalidomide. And here's two forms of that drug, and they're mirror images of each other, so these are optical isomers of each other. And are one of these different than the other from a drug standpoint? And the answer is yeah. It turns out one of these isomers causes birth defects, and the other form is actually shown to be harmless and actually very effective against morning sickness. So that is giving us evidence that there actually is something chemically different about these molecules and how they interact with our bodies, and And this is something that we want our students to be able to understand and appreciate. So one of the challenges was, could we design some sort of chemical model that would illustrate how one optical isomer could bind effectively to some sort of host and the other one not? And there was a famous chemist named Donald Cram, UCLA, who studied this sort of phenomena. He created what are called chiral recognition complexes, and here's an example of one of those complexes, and it's actually got a little hole in here, and he was able to design these compounds that would effectively bind one mirror image of some sort of guest molecule and not effectively bind the other. And for his work, and the people who contributed won the Nobel Prize. So we actually used the Gaussian software to create this host complex and the two mirror images, and turn those into 3D printed forms, and you can actually show that one of these fits very nicely down in that little cleft inside this host complex. If you try to do it with the other one, you learn that this ring right here, part of that ring, sort of bumps into part of the molecules, and it just doesn't fit. It's almost like a lock and a key. This is something students really have a hard time visualizing if we're trying to draw it on a chalkboard or just look at it on a computer screen. Here's some other pictures of that chiral recognition complex. This is what's called a surface rendering, and where you can really clearly see that hole in the cleft where the guest molecules fit down in there. And this is showing the progression of creating this on the computer using a couple different softwares, PyMol and MeshLab, to process that and get it into a 3D printed form. One of my colleagues in the chem department, Paul Sibold, has also been playing around with 3D printing. He's our organic professor, and one of the things Sue and I joke about is that, as she's got to know me, she's learned that molecules actually, we tend to think of them as little ball and stick structures like you saw on the previous slide, but that's not really accurate. Molecules are often blobs, and so my colleague Paul has been sort of trying to reinforce that fact with his organic students, and he's had some students build these simple organic structures, and then we've generated these surface renderings of them, and he's created these really cool figures that show the stick figure superimposed on the blob that would be the molecule that would be interacting with other things around it. And so this is a very powerful picture in my mind, and he actually just published this. On your handout, you may not see this picture if you have the PDF file, because he's just now getting this out into the literature. Other things that we have a lot of students who are interested in biochemistry and the structures and functions of proteins. There's some great web resources out there available, something called a protein data bank, where for years chemists and biochemists have been storing structures of proteins and other biologically interesting structures, and we wanted to figure out how to 3D print those, and so this is an example of us printing. This was very early on when we started playing around with this on one of the MakerBot printers, but this is called a ribbon structure of a protein, and here you can actually see this is one of the printers where the support structure is actually meant to be broken away, so you have to come along and snap this thinner support off of the ribbon. And to generate this, we downloaded the structure from the protein data bank, used PyMol and MeshLab to process it, and could send it to the 3D printer. And as we've gotten better at this, I've actually incorporated this into the regular curriculum. So both last spring and we're doing this fall, my physical chemistry class, I give them an assignment where they are able to go and create a molecule of their own choosing, and we actually require them to justify why they picked that molecule as a little small writing assignment. But, they create the molecules using computational chemistry software, and then ultimately convert it into a printable form. And so here you see a lot of the different molecules that were selected by those students. All right, I'm going to hand this back over to Sue for a little while. So.
Right. So you've had your chemistry lesson for this morning, and for me, chemistry was a little painful. So I've learned really to appreciate it through some of the 3D printing work that we've done, and the concepts are easier to understand when you see it in that way. I definitely sympathize with the students. So once you've built your 3D printing lab and you've developed these collaborations, I suggest the next step is, use the students, or use if you're a public library, use your patrons as teachers. And our students have been the best teachers. They bring their friends to the lab and they teach them how to use it. So that's a very important part of this. And then share success stories. I mean, one of the easiest ways to get more people involved in this is to tell them what's worked. And so we started with chemistry, but we've certainly branched out from there. And when other professors start hearing that the chemists are publishing in this area and incorporating these into these labs, they want to do it too. So what has happened in the past, it's really been less than 3 years. I think we started this two years ago, this past summer. And what has come out of this in 2 short years is really phenomenal. Again, like nothing I've ever seen in a initiative that we've done in the library. So you can see through the list, we've had national conference presentations both in library and chemistry, and state and poster sessions, and 2 book chapters, one in a chemistry book, one in a library book, journal articles, workshops, webinars. But most important about all of this is, yes, I got publications, Tandy got publications, other faculty members got publications, but students got publications and presentations at national conferences as undergraduates. So this was a really great initiative in many ways. Our library has won 2 innovation awards for our work with 3D printing, and it is not because we have 3D printers. Everybody has 3D printers, or lots of people have 3D printers, but we've won the innovation awards for our curricular collaborations, in particular with chemistry that you heard about from Tandy. And very exciting, I mentioned this spring we are starting our own rapid prototyping, which is an industry term for 3D printing course that will be taught in the library. So let me just give you a couple of other examples about what you could do beyond chemistry, or how you can start thinking about this in other fields. So in biology, we have a small natural history museum, and some of the professors and students have been involved in scanning different things from that museum. You can see a human skull, a bear skull, and one of the things they wanted in the museum that they didn't have was a manatee skull. So we borrowed one from somebody else and 3D printed. So even though they don't have an actual manatee skull, now they have the 3D printed replica of that particular skull. So this is a project that one of the biology students came up with on her own. She actually designed this 3D printable flower that was going to be used in insect research. It had something to do with scent, and you see here, this is the first pieces that were coming off the 3D printer when she started her research. So math. Math is an interesting thing you don't immediately think of as being 3D printable, but many of the concepts in math, just like in chemistry, are perhaps better visualized when you can see it in a 3D format. And we like to joke that if you are a little on the nerd side and you want to impress your significant other, you can 3D print them this incredible math function that turns into the shape of a heart.
That's the equation for love.
Yeah, the equation for love, that's what we say. So computer science. This is a lot of computer science students have done things in our innovation lab, but this is my favorite. We had a student last year who spent the whole year developing a workable drone, and you can see all the plastic parts on the drone were printed in the library. And I went to his senior research talk, and the talk itself was more about the computer science behind how to make this thing fly, but it was very gratifying to hear him say that he could not have done this project if the library had not had the resources that we had for him to be able to print out his prototypes. And he did many prototypes before he got to a working model, which is exactly what you want students to be doing, is that kind of exploration and experiential learning. Our music students love the lab. This year in particular, I've got a whole group of them that have taken over the 3D printing, and they're doing replica instruments that you see here, but this year they're really getting into doing working mouthpieces for their instruments. So there are practical applications as well as fun applications in music. And then 3D scanning, you know, this is another part of the 3D printing. We've been talking to you about how you take different software packages and convert them into 3D printable files, but you can also take physical objects and turn them into 3D printable files. So you see here we've got some fun little toys. This is our first scanner. It was a $700 MakerBot scanner, and to be honest, we have not been thrilled with the results of the scanner. It's very picky, and it'll only scan certain things. But you can see we have had some success. The dog in the middle is Tandy's son's favorite stuffed animal, and we've printed several versions of Spot over time, and he really loves his little 3D figures of his favorite toy. But there's other ways to do 3D scanning that we found are much better over time. And I'm going to let Tandy talk to you about this particular phone app, which is called 123D Catch. Very, very interesting. You can see him in the natural history lab scanning a skull.
Yeah, so this is you really don't need to go buy a 3D scanner. You may already have one in your pocket or purse. If you have a cell phone with a phone on it. So there's an iPhone app called 123D Catch, and I think the app is also available for like Android and other devices. But how it works is you take about 30 or 40 pictures in a circle around the object that you're wanting to scan, and you do these kind of, break it up. You do part of them at sort of a lower height, and then some of them at a higher height, and you do a complete circle. All those pictures get uploaded to the Autodesk website and are processed, and it can take several hours for that processing to happen, but you'll be able to log back in later and download an STL file that is basically a three-dimensional representation of your object. And we have been kind of blown away by just how well it works. And so yeah, here's a skull torso from our Natural History Museum. This is a picture, taking the pictures. Putting this on a table is kind of nice because it allows you to circular table to keep your distance the same from picture to picture. When you get that file back, you can open it up in various softwares like MeshLab, and here's what you would see. And you can edit this. You can, like we were just interested in the skull part of this, and we were able to crop the head and this little hook that thing, we were able to cut that off, and this looks like some sort of trauma here, but you can actually go back in and patch those holes using MeshLab. And then we 3D printed it, and here this has a support structure in it, and then the final form. That file that you download back from the Autodesk website, when you initially open it up and look at it, it's kind of wild. This is actually a video of the we actually recorded this off an iPad, but this is the file. You can actually see pieces of the room, the walls, and chairs and such, where we were actually taking those photographs. And this is kind of creepy looking at times, but zoom in on the skull. But this is what this is how good that 3D scanning app and software work. And pretty amazing detail. And again, free to use, works for the iPhone, Android phones.
Yeah, so that was one of our favorite discoveries, that you could use that technology for free. And let me tell you, if you whip out your iPhone and show that little video to a donor, they get so excited about it. So as I said, 3D printing is an easy sell. So to wrap this up, there's things that you should consider if you're going to do this. And the first is, what learning or emerging technologies are the best match for your institution's curriculum or your public library's mission. So it doesn't necessarily have to be 3D printing. I mean, everything we've talked about today could apply to other emerging technologies, but you would want to kind of ask yourself the same questions about how it would integrate into the curriculum. And then, does an emerging technology bring a new twist to something that's already being taught? And you saw in chemistry, absolutely, and we found that to be the case in biology and integrative health and computer science and many other disciplines.
Well, would students find concepts in a particular discipline more accessible through hands-on learning technologies? I'm hoping that we've demonstrated absolutely yes, and not only that, but the next bullet point, just I've never seen students display more enthusiasm or motivation for, engaging in chemistry, which can be a real challenge. I'm not teaching human sexuality, so sometimes it can be a challenge to get students involved and really wanting to work with this stuff. They're dragging their friends into the lab. They're actually teaching each other how to do things, which is just amazing.
So the last thing, do publication and presentation opportunities for the librarians and the teaching faculty and students open up? And we found that absolutely yes. Again, never seen anything like this. For enthusiasm, we get invited to speak all the time about this, and I think it's because people are really hungry to figure out how to do this well in their libraries, and we feel like we have figured it out, and we're still learning all the time, and as I said, the course next spring is going to open up in some new avenues for us. But we have had a very, very positive experience with using this technology in the library, and we couldn't have made it this successful without doing collaborations with our teaching faculty members. So that is our presentation, and we would be happy to answer any questions that you have if you have them.
I don't know if our moderator is still here.
We cannot see any questions on our screen, so we're going to assume that there are none. And you can see my email on this last screen, so if you do want to contact us and ask any questions, please feel free. We thank you very much for attending today, and we appreciate your attention.